Good evening and welcome back to Midnight Radio True Crime. It's always a quiet comfort knowing you're here, somewhere out there, listening in the dark, perhaps winding down after a long day, or maybe lying awake, searching for a voice to keep you company. Thank you for choosing this story tonight. We hope wherever you are, whether it's a city that never sleeps or a quiet town under a pale November moon, you find a little peace in the sound of our voices. Let us know in the comments what city you're tuning in from tonight. It always amazes us how far these stories travel. Tonight's story is about an ordinary morning in a small town. A woman who walked into a school expecting nothing more than a quiet day of teaching, and instead uncovered something so deeply wrong, it would haunt her for the rest of her life. So, if you're settled in, if your room is still, and the night outside feels just a little too quiet, let's begin.
I still remember the smell of chalk that morning, and the faint sound of children's laughter spilling from the hallways as I stood in front of the classroom door, room 12. It was my first time substituting at Greendale Middle School, a small, low-brick building on the edge of town, tucked behind maple trees that were already losing their leaves. I remember thinking it looked like a place time had forgotten. The old bell out front, the faded blue benches, the mural on the wall that read, "Be kind, be brave." My name is Claire. I've been teaching for 8 years, mostly temporary jobs around the county, filling in for maternity leaves, long-term absences, or just when someone needed a break. That day, I was called in last minute. Just one day, the woman on the phone had said. 7th grade English. The kids are good. It felt like any other Tuesday. When I unlocked room 12, the morning light was just starting to filter through the blinds, soft and gold. The desks were arranged in neat rows, each one labeled with a child's name in thick black marker. I set my bag down, checked the lesson plan left on the desk, and tried to calm my nerves. There's always that quiet moment before the first bell. The sound of lockers slamming, shoes squeaking on the linoleum, the laughter in the hall. I've always loved that sound. It feels like life itself. But something about this classroom felt heavy. It wasn't obvious at first, just a strange chill, as if the air never quite warmed up. The clock above the whiteboard had stopped at 2:47, and when I went to the window, I saw that one of the trees outside, the one right by the entrance, was covered in old paper cranes. Hundreds of them, hanging from thin strings, twisting slowly in the breeze. Then the bell rang. They came in laughing loud, tossing backpacks and talking over each other. 13-year-olds, full of energy. Normal. I smiled, introduced myself, wrote my name on the board. Miss Claire. They quieted down eventually. We went over the attendance list together, the usual routine. But when I started reading names aloud, one of the girls near the front, a quiet one with braids and a sky blue hoodie, raised her hand. "You said Hannah," she said softly. "Yes," I replied, looking at the list. "Hannah Price." The room went still. Every single child had gone silent. It was like the air shifted. The easy chatter vanished in a heartbeat. I remember the sound of the blinds ticking against the window, the way the fluorescent light buzzed above me. Finally, the girl in the blue hoodie whispered, "She's not here anymore." I frowned. Oh, did she move? No one answered. They just stared at me, not angry, not sad, just watchful. The boy in the back muttered something under his breath. I couldn't quite catch it, but I think it was "Don't say her name." I laughed awkwardly, trying to move on. "All right, no problem. Let's continue." But the name Hannah Price stuck in my mind. It was written in the same careful handwriting as all the others, on both the attendance sheet and on one of the desks, the second one by the window. There was even a pencil still in the tray, a small heart carved into the wood. At recess, I asked another teacher in the staff room about it. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with kind eyes and a mug that said "World's Okayest Educator." When I mentioned Hannah's name, she froze. Then, without looking up from her coffee, she said quietly, "Don't bring that up with the kids. It's better to just teach what's planned." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Just sipped her coffee and stared out the window. By lunch, I couldn't shake the unease. I walked past the hallway bulletin board, the one filled with old photos, class projects, and newspaper clippings. And there, near the bottom corner, partly covered by a newer flyer, I saw it. A newspaper article. Local student remembered. Community honors 12-year-old Hannah Price. The date was from last year. The article said she had died suddenly, an accident on a field trip, it said. No further details. Just her smiling photo in the middle, wearing the same sky blue hoodie one of her classmates had on this morning. When I looked closer, I noticed something else. The photo had been taken in front of that same classroom, room 12. The rest of the day felt strange. The students were polite but distant. Every time I walked near the empty desk, they'd fall silent. One boy even asked if he could move to another seat. By the final bell, my nerves were raw. I packed my things, turned off the lights, and took one last look around the room. And that's when I saw it. On the back wall, near the supply cabinet. A faint handprint, smeared in dust, too small to belong to an adult. It looked fresh. And underneath it, written faintly in chalk, were 3 words. I didn't fall. When the last of the students left, the hallway grew still. That hollow kind of quiet schools have after the final bell. The air was thick with the smell of cleaning spray and old paper. Somewhere down the hall, a floor buffer hummed faintly. I sat alone at the teacher's desk, staring at those 3 words on the wall. I didn't fall. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Kids playing pranks, maybe. A leftover message from last year. But the dust had been disturbed, like a fingertip had just brushed it. I erased the words with a tissue, but they smeared instead, faint traces clinging to the surface. Something about that small resistance unsettled me more than the message itself. I gathered my things and stepped out into the hallway. The afternoon light through the high windows painted everything in pale gold. Too calm, too gentle for how I felt. The staff room was nearly empty. A few teachers sat hunched over papers, the sound of pens scratching quietly. I spotted the woman from earlier, the one with the coffee mug, and approached her again. "Excuse me," I said softly. "About that student, Hannah Price. I didn't mean to bring up anything painful, but I saw her name on the roster today. I thought maybe it was a mistake." The woman set her mug down slowly. She studied me for a long time, her eyes tired. Then she shook her head. "It's not a mistake," she said. "The list hasn't been updated. Her mother still volunteers here sometimes, and well, nobody's had the heart to change it." I nodded, unsure what to say. "She was in my class," the woman added after a moment. "Smart kid. Kind. Always stayed late to help tidy up. It was a terrible accident." "What happened?" I asked. The woman hesitated. "She fell," she said finally. "On the field trip. The police said it was an accident, and that's what it was. Nothing more." Her tone made it clear she didn't want to continue, but I couldn't shake that last image from the classroom. Those words in chalk. I thanked her, grabbed my coat, and walked out through the main doors. The paper cranes outside rustled softly in the breeze. Hundreds of them, each one made from notebook paper, names and doodles faintly visible on the wings. They hung from the tree's branches like quiet memories. A small wooden plaque at the base read, "For Hannah. Fly high, sweet girl." I stood there longer than I meant to. The wind was cold, carrying the faint scent of rain. When I finally turned to leave, I noticed someone sitting in a parked car across the street. An older woman, maybe in her 50s, watching the school from behind the wheel. Her window was half down, cigarette smoke drifting out. Our eyes met for a brief second before she looked away. I didn't think much of it then. Not yet. That evening, I drove home through the quiet back roads, the trees arching overhead, their leaves a dying orange. My mind kept circling back to that classroom, the empty desk, the hush that fell when I said her name, the uneasy silence of the staff room. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself to let it go. One day of work. That was all it was supposed to be. But when I went to hang up my coat, something fell from the pocket. A small folded piece of paper. It must have slipped in during the day. Maybe one of the students had tucked it there as a prank. But when I unfolded it, my hands started to shake. It was a paper crane. And on one of its wings, written in neat, looping handwriting, were the words, "Ask about the bus." I sat down hard on the couch, staring at it. I didn't know what it meant. The bus? The field trip? I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Nothing. That night I barely slept. The sound of rain tapping against the window kept me awake, mingling with a faint ache in my chest I couldn't explain. The next morning, I decided to go back. The office staff hadn't asked for me again, but I told myself I'd left something behind. My notebook, maybe. Something believable. When I arrived, the parking lot was half empty. The sky was still gray from the night's rain, and puddles reflected the building's tired facade. Inside, the secretary looked surprised to see me. "Oh, Miss Claire, right? Back again so soon." I smiled politely. "Yes, I think I left my planner in room 12. She nodded and went back to typing. "Keys are in the door. Everyone's at morning assembly if you need anything." The hallways were silent. I passed the bulletin board again. The same memorial photo, the same smile frozen in print. But now the bottom corner of the article was torn away. Room 12 looked exactly as I'd left it. Except for one thing. The desk by the window, Hannah's desk, was clean. The carved heart in the pencil groove was gone. It had been sanded smooth. And on the teacher's desk, sitting right in the middle, was a yellow sticky note. It said in small letters, "Stop asking." I froze. Then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not rushing like a student or teacher would. Just steady. They stopped outside the door. I turned, expecting to see the secretary or another teacher. But it was the woman from the car, the one I'd seen watching the school the day before. She stepped inside, eyes red, clutching a crumpled tissue in one hand. "Are you the substitute?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Can I help you?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that sent a chill through me so deep it felt physical. "She didn't fall," the woman whispered. "And nobody here wants to talk about it." She stood there in the doorway, pale, trembling, holding herself like someone who hadn't slept in months. Rainwater had darkened her coat, and a strand of hair clung to her cheek. I didn't know what to say. The air between us felt dense, charged with something unsaid. She stepped further into the room and looked around, her eyes scanning every corner like she was searching for something that wasn't there. Her gaze stopped on the window seat, the one beside the desk that had once belonged to Hannah. "She used to sit there," she said softly. "Always by the window. Said she liked the light." I hesitated. "You're Hannah's mother?" She nodded slowly. "Linda Price." Then she smiled, faintly, a reflex more than an expression. "I volunteer here sometimes. At least I used to. They told me to take a break after everything." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. I could see her hands shaking. "They told me to stop coming," she said quietly. "Said it made the other children uncomfortable." I didn't know what to say. Her voice wasn't angry. It was empty, like she'd been hollowed out by too much grief. "Mrs. Price," I began carefully. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. I only..." She interrupted me, eyes sharp. "They told you it was an accident, didn't they?" I hesitated. "Yes. That's what I was told." Her lips trembled as she gave a small, bitter laugh. "That's what they all say. Every one of them. But nobody saw it happen. Not one adult. Just the children. And they were told not to talk." I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. The faint rush of adrenaline that comes when you realize a story isn't what you thought it was. She walked toward the desk, fingers brushing over the smooth wood. "They fixed this," she murmured. "Sanded it down. I used to trace her name here. I'd come after hours, just to feel close to her." For a moment she stood very still. Then she turned toward me. She was afraid of that bus, she said. Every morning she begged me to drive her. Said the driver shouted too much. Said the other kids didn't like her. But I was late for work, and I told her she had to take it like everyone else. That day was the field trip. Her eyes met mine. And now she's gone. There was a rawness in her voice that made my throat tighten. "What do you mean she was afraid?" I asked softly. "She said things happened on that bus. Cruel things. I thought she was being dramatic. But I found bruises on her arms, small ones, like from fingers." I swallowed hard. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told the principal," she said. "I told the driver too. They said middle school girls fight sometimes, that it was just teasing. But she was different after that. Quieter. Like she was already trying to disappear. The rain outside began to thicken, faint taps against the glass. I could feel something pulling at me, a teacher's instinct, maybe. That deep ache that comes when a child's pain is ignored. "Mrs. Price," I said gently, "if you'd like, I can." She held up a hand. "No, you can't. Nobody can." Her eyes were wet, but her voice had steadied. "They said she fell at the overlook. But I saw the report. There were marks on her wrists. She didn't just fall, Miss Claire. Someone pushed her. Or made her run." The words hung in the room like smoke. I opened my mouth to ask something, anything, but she was already walking toward the door. "They'll tell you to stop asking questions," she said quietly, not looking back. "Don't. Please don't. It's not just about Hannah anymore." And then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of rain and cigarette smoke behind her. I stood there for a long time, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing into my ears. Eventually, I stepped closer to the desk. There, beneath the smooth surface, a faint line of rougher wood caught my fingers, a shallow carving half hidden beneath the sanding. When I leaned closer, I could still make out the letters. "Help me." That night, I drove home through fog so thick it blurred the world into soft shapes. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every few minutes, I replayed her words in my mind. Someone pushed her, or made her run. At home, I tried to distract myself, turned on the TV, made tea, but the sound of children's laughter from earlier kept echoing in my head. It wasn't happy laughter. It had something strained beneath it, like nervous energy. When I finally went to bed, I left the paper crane on my nightstand. The small folded wings cast a faint shadow in the lamplight. Somewhere outside, a car passed, slow, deliberate. Then another. And then silence again. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But before I drifted off, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A faint creak from the hallway, followed by the whisper of paper sliding under my door. I sat up, heart pounding. On the floor was another paper crane. This one unfolded easily, as if meant to be opened. Inside, written in pencil, were 4 words. "Check the bus list." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that note again. "Check the bus list." It felt like a voice repeating in the back of my mind, steady, insistent, impossible to ignore. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. The air outside my window looked washed clean, but my stomach was in knots. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something I didn't understand, and maybe shouldn't. Still, by mid-morning, I found myself in the school parking lot again. The secretary looked surprised to see me a 3rd day in a row. "Back again," she said lightly. "They must really like you here." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everything was in order before the regular teacher returns." She nodded and went back to her computer. The rhythmic tapping of her keyboard filled the silence. Behind her, a corkboard held all sorts of school documents, announcements, permission slips, old event posters. And near the bottom corner, half pinned under a calendar, was a list labeled, "Field Trip, May 14th, Bus Assignments." My heart started beating faster. I stepped closer casually. "Mind if I check something?" The secretary didn't even look up. "Go ahead." The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded. There were 3 columns, Bus A, Bus B, and Bus C. Each column had 20 or so names neatly typed, followed by the initials of the teacher supervising. I scanned the names quickly. Bus A, Bus B, Bus C. No Hannah Price. But halfway down Bus B's list, between 2 names, there was a faint gap. An extra line where something had clearly been erased. The space wasn't big enough to notice unless you were looking for it. The type alignment jumped ever so slightly, as if someone had deleted a row and nudged the list back together. I felt the back of my neck prickle. "Do you know who keeps these lists?" I asked. The secretary turned. "Those? Oh, probably Ms. Kent. She handled the logistics last year. She's still here." "Why?" "Just curious," I said quickly. "Ms. Kent." I remembered the name, a short, sharp woman from the staff lounge, always wearing cardigans and keeping her sentences clipped. I found her later that day in the library, rearranging books on a cart. "Miss Kent," I said softly. "I'm Claire. The substitute. I was wondering if I could ask you something about last year's field trip. She froze for just a second. A barely perceptible pause before she turned around with a polite smile. Oh, that. Yes, I remember. Awful business, wasn't it? I nodded. Do you remember which bus Hannah Price was on? Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on the book she was holding. Bus B, I think, she said. Why? I tried to sound casual. I just noticed her name wasn't on the printed list. Maybe a mistake? She set the book down slowly. You shouldn't go looking into that, she said quietly. It won't help anyone. I'm not trying to stir anything up, I replied. She's gone, Miss Claire. Her tone had changed, soft but final. What good does it do to dig her up again? You weren't here. You don't know how hard it was. I know she was 13. I said before I could stop myself. And I know someone wanted people to stop asking about her. For a second, something flashed behind her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Then she said, almost under her breath, you should talk to the driver. If you can find him. The bus driver? She nodded. He quit after that trip. Moved upstate, I heard. But he came back last month. I saw him near the grocery store. Still wears that same red cap. Do you remember his name? She hesitated. Doyle, she said finally. Rick Doyle. When I left the library, the hallways were empty again. The sound of rain had returned, tapping gently against the windows like soft fingers. That night, I looked him up. There wasn't much, just a few mentions in local news archives. He'd worked for the district for nearly 15 years, spotless record. Retired quietly. No statement about the accident. But there was something else. A small obituary from the same week as Hannah's death. A boy from the same class, Ethan Crow, had died only 3 days later. No details. Just unexpected causes. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen washing pale across my face. 2 deaths in 1 week. 1 accident. 1 unexpected. I clicked again. The article about Ethan was only 2 paragraphs long, almost an afterthought. But there was a photo, a thin boy with wide, anxious eyes. The caption said he'd been a close friend of the late Hannah Price. I felt something twist in my chest. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples. It was all too much coincidence. Too many silences, too many careful omissions. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. For a moment, only static. Then a voice low, hoarse, shaking whispered, stop asking about the bus. And then it clicked dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone still in my hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself it was probably a prank, some cruel joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Because just before the call ended, under the static, I'd heard something else. Children's laughter. Distant. And the faint squeak of a school bus door closing. The next morning, I drove toward the outskirts of Meadow Ridge, my mind racing with everything I'd learned so far. Rick Doyle, the bus driver, was the next piece of this puzzle. And deep down, I knew he wasn't going to be easy to find. The directions were vague, just a rural street name scribbled in a local business directory. But eventually, I pulled up to a small house with peeling white paint and a swing set sagging in the backyard. A gray Honda sat in the driveway. The same one I'd noticed across the field near the lake days earlier. I took a deep breath and walked to the front door. I rang the bell. After a long pause, the door opened slightly. A man's face appeared, lined, tired, with deep-set eyes that had seen too much. Rick Doyle. Can I help you? He asked, voice rough. Mr. Doyle, I said softly. I'm Claire Rowan, the substitute teacher at Meadow Ridge High. I wanted to ask you about the field trip last year, May 14th. His eyes flicked toward me, narrowing. Why do you care? I just need to understand what happened, I said, trying to sound calm, steady. It's about Hannah Price. The name seemed to hit him. His jaw tightened, and he stepped back, opening the door wider. Gumain. But I'm telling you, this isn't a story anyone should dig into. The inside of the house smelled faintly of damp wood and old coffee. Rick motioned to a chair, and I sat. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, stirring silently. They told you she died in an accident, he he began quietly. That's what everyone says. But accidents aren't the whole truth. And if you're here to judge me, don't. I'm not here to judge, I said. I just want to know what happened. He took a sip of coffee and let the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. I was driving bus B that day, he said. Field trip to Lake Meadow. 30 kids. A lot of noise. I remember her. Hannah. Quiet little thing, always in the back, always watching the world like it was a movie and she was invisible. I nodded. Did anything happen on the bus? Rick hesitated. I think I missed it. I should have seen it, but I didn't. A group of kids, older girls, they were picking on her. Pushing, teasing, calling her names. I didn't notice until she bolted. She bolted. I asked, heart racing. He leaned back, hands gripping the coffee mug. Yes. Down the aisle, straight to the door. I called her name, tried to stop her, but she was fast. And the bus was moving. I had to keep it steady. The lake was right there. She slipped. I could feel my stomach turn. And then I panicked, he admitted, voice breaking slightly. I pulled over, called 911, tried to save her, but by the time we got to her, she was gone. Was there anyone else involved? I asked cautiously. Rick shook his head. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. I swear. And the police, they didn't look too closely. They called it an accident and moved on. I pressed on. But the other boy, Ethan Crow, he died 3 days later. Do you know anything about that? Rick's face went pale. He set the coffee down and ran a hand through his hair. I think it's connected. Ethan was close to Hannah. He knew something happened on the bus. He tried to tell someone, but I don't know. The school didn't listen. And after he died, I realized maybe it wasn't just an accident. The room felt smaller, the light outside dimmer. I swallowed, trying to process the gravity of what he was saying. Why did you come back to Meadowridge? I asked quietly. Rick sighed. I needed to see if anyone remembered, if anyone cared. But I see now, most people don't want to know. They'd rather pretend nothing happened. We sat in silence for a moment. The hum of the heater, the faint creak of floorboards, the distant sound of traffic, all of it pressed into me. Then Rick leaned forward, eyes intense. You need to be careful. People here don't like questions. Not about the kids, not about the field trip, not about anything. Dig too deep, and you'll find yourself in danger. I understand, I said. But I can't stop now. Not when so much is hidden. He nodded slowly. All right. But if you're serious, start with the bus roster. Look at who was absent that day, look at the gaps. And check the essays. Lila, Hannah, the papers. They tell a story that nobody else wants to hear. I left his house with my head spinning. The drizzle had turned into light rain. The Honda was gone from the driveway. The swing set sagged in the yard, silent still. And I realized the bus list wasn't just a roster. It was a map, a timeline, a record of what the school tried to erase. Somewhere in that small town, someone had gone to great lengths to cover up the truth. And I knew deep down that if I wanted to find answers, I would have to go further, even if it meant digging into secrets people had buried for a reason. The next day, I returned to room 104. The hallways were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming softly above. It felt different now, heavier. I carried the folder Rick Doyle had mentioned, the one labeled Hannah's essays, and my heart beat fast. I placed the folder on the desk near the window, the one Hannah had always used. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I ran my fingers over the carved initials HB in the worn wood. The classroom smelled faintly of old paper and chalk. Dust motes floated in the sunlight that slipped through the blinds. I felt like I was walking into a sacred space, one the world had tried to forget. Finally, I opened the folder. The essays were stacked neatly, each one dated and labeled with Hannah's name. The first few were simple reflections on her favorite books, light, almost cheerful. But as I flipped through, the tone shifted. The handwriting became tighter, sharper. Sentences were crossed out, rewritten. Notes in the margins, small, almost frantic, hinting at tension, unease, and fear. One essay caught my eye. Dated the week before the field trip, the title read, The shadows on the bus. I read the first paragraph aloud softly, almost involuntarily. Sometimes the people around you smile and laugh, but they don't see you. They think you're invisible. And sometimes, invisible is what keeps you alive. The words sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if she had known that someone on that bus, someone she trusted, would hurt her. I kept reading. Her essays described daily life in the classroom, her friends, and quiet observations about the teachers. But the recurring theme was fear. Fear of being ignored. Fear of being pushed too far. Fear of the lake. And then I came to a page that wasn't dated, the handwriting almost smeared, as though written in tears. I can't tell anyone what happened. They won't believe me. Not the teachers. Not the police. Maybe someone will read this someday. Maybe someone will know the truth. I set the folder down, my hands trembling. Rick Doyle's words came back to me. The teasing on the bus, the moments he hadn't noticed. I had to know more. I pulled the papers carefully, one by one, and began comparing them to the attendance list. The gaps in the bus roster now felt deliberate. Someone had erased her presence from official records. Someone had tried to erase her entirely. I checked the names around hers. Some had notes, initials of supervising teachers. But in the erased line, Hannah's line, there was nothing. It was like a missing piece of a puzzle, leaving a jagged hole in the timeline of that day. Then I noticed something subtle. On the margins of several essays, small pencil marks in a different handwriting. Corrections. Feedback. Red ink that was clearly recent, written well after her death. It was Mrs. Carver's handwriting. She had been grading these papers, even after Hannah was gone. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of it pressing into my chest. The essays weren't just words. They were evidence. They told a story no one else had acknowledged. A record of a girl whose life had been overlooked, dismissed, then disappeared. I could hear the faint laughter of children outside the hallway. Ordinary, unaware, continuing on with life. And in that contrast, I felt the depth of the injustice. But the essays didn't stop there. One page detailed a particular incident on the bus, the very day of the field trip. I tried to sit quietly at the back. I didn't want trouble, but they wouldn't leave me alone. Pushed me, called me names. And he didn't see. Not the driver. Not the teachers. Not anyone. I thought if I held still, maybe I could disappear. Maybe then they'd let me be. I felt tears prick my eyes. I had read many cases, many stories of tragedy, but these words carried the weight of a life shrinking away under the gaze of indifference. And then the final line of that essay. If I disappear, maybe someone will notice. Maybe someone will care. It was impossible to ignore the connection to her death at the lake. The essays weren't just reflections. They were a cry for help that had gone unheard. I closed the folder and pressed my forehead to the desk. Silence surrounded me, save for the quiet hum of the classroom lights. The reality was clear. Hannah hadn't just fallen through cracks in supervision. Someone had been negligent. Someone had allowed it to happen. And now through these essays, the story was speaking. A soft creak at the door made me look up. The classroom was empty. The hallway was still empty. And yet, for the first time, I felt certain I wasn't alone. Somewhere, someone was watching, waiting, hoping that the past would remain buried. I gathered the essays, slipping them carefully into my bag. If I was going to uncover the truth about Hannah Price, I knew one thing. It wouldn't just be about reading her words. It would be about finding the people who had chosen to ignore them and holding them accountable. But as I stepped toward the door, I caught sight of a shadow across the hallway. A figure standing just beyond the line of fluorescent light, silent, still observing. And then just as suddenly as I saw it, the figure was gone. I couldn't shake the shadow I had seen in the hallway. My chest still felt tight as I left room 104, carrying Hannah's essays in my bag. The school felt emptier than usual, and every step echoed unnaturally against the tile floors. I knew what I had to do next. The essays hinted at someone, a teacher, who had been present that day, watching, but failing to intervene. Claire Rowan, substitute teacher. Observer. But not the only one. Someone else had been there. Someone whose negligence had contributed to the tragedy. I asked the secretary about the teachers who had supervised the field trip. One name repeatedly came up: Mr. Stanton, a literature teacher who had been with the district for over a decade. He had been absent the day Hannah's accident happened, on paper at least, but the essays hinted otherwise. I waited until after school and drove to his house. It was a modest, brick home tucked away on a quiet street. No car in the driveway. The front blinds were drawn. I knocked softly on the door. A middle-aged man with thinning hair opened it, blinking against the dim light. Yes. His tone was cautious, almost defensive. Mr. Stanton? I'm Claire Rowan, a substitute at Meadow Ridge High. I wanted to ask you about the field trip last May. His face tightened. What about it? There's a student, Hannah Price. She wrote some essays about her experience. I think you were on the bus that day. His eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought he might slam the door. Instead, he stepped aside. Gumain. Inside, the house smelled of old books and dust. Rickety shelves lined the walls, filled with literary classics, dog-eared and yellowed with age. He motioned to a chair. Sit. But I warn you, you won't like what you hear. He sat. He poured himself a cup of coffee, hands trembling slightly. Hannah, poor girl. She had so much potential, so much life. And she died because nobody took her seriously. I know, I said softly. Her essays, they suggest that someone, maybe even a teacher, saw what was happening and didn't act. He sighed, staring into his coffee. I should have. I saw her. I didn't act fast enough. I was distracted. Stupid. Busy with my own lesson plans, my own problems. I regret it every single day. I leaned forward. What happened on the bus? He swallowed hard. There was teasing, name-calling, pushing. I noticed it too late. By the time I tried to intervene, it was already too late. She bolted, ran straight toward the lake. I called out, but she didn't hear. Nobody heard. His voice broke. And after she died, they told us to move on. Pretend it was an accident. No one asked questions. Nobody wanted to know. And I didn't push either. I let it slide. I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing down on the room. It wasn't just Hannah's death. It was the negligence, the silence, the cover-up. Why didn't anyone else intervene? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. Everyone was busy. Everyone was thinking someone else would act. And by the time it became clear, it was too late. I nodded, taking it in. And Ethan Crow? The boy who died 3 days later. His hands clenched around his mug. He knew something. He tried to tell someone. I think the shock killed him in the end. Or maybe the guilt. I don't know. But he paid the price too. Silence fell between us. Only the faint ticking of a wall clock marked time. I need to understand the full picture, I said. The essays, the bus, what happened that day. I need the truth. He looked at me for a long moment. Then quietly he said, The truth? The truth is that everyone looked away. Everyone. From the teachers to the administrators. Nobody wanted to deal with the consequences. And poor Hannah, she ended up alone, scared, and unheard. I swallowed, feeling the gravity of what he was saying. The essays weren't just words on paper. They were the echo of every person who had ignored her cries. Every hand that had let her slip through their fingers. Will you help me? I asked. He hesitated. I suppose. If it means her story is finally told. If it means someone remembers her for who she was, not just how she died. We spent the next hour piecing together what he remembered. The seating arrangements, the moments of teasing, the lapses in supervision. Every detail painted a clearer, yet more devastating picture. When I left his house, the sky had darkened. A gentle drizzle began to fall. The quiet streets of Meadow Ridge felt heavier somehow, as if the town itself were holding its breath. And I realized, with a sinking feeling, that uncovering the truth would not be easy. Not because the evidence was missing, the essays, the bus roster, the witness accounts, but because the people involved had spent a year pretending it never happened. Pretending Hannah Price, and the boy who died after her, didn't matter. And now, it was up to me to make sure the story was told. The folder of essays rested heavily in my bag as I drove back to Meadow Ridge High. Each mile felt longer than the last, weighed down by the gravity of what I'd just learned from Mr. Stanton. His guilt, his confession, had confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't a simple tragedy. It was a chain of negligence, apathy, and deliberate erasure. I parked in the faculty lot, slipping inside the school before most of the staff had arrived. The hallways smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and wet floors. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, as if acknowledging the tension in the building. I went straight to the office, asking for the principal's calendar and any records from the day of the field trip. The secretary handed me a stack of papers, pretending casual disinterest. She didn't need to know what I was piecing together yet. As I sifted through attendance sheets, permission slips, and emergency logs, a pattern emerged. There were subtle anomalies: missing signatures, delayed submissions, vague notes about absences. The bus roster had been altered in multiple places, lines erased, names shifted, and every adjustment had a faint type of urgency, like someone had been trying to hide something after the fact. I pulled Hannah's name again. The space she should have occupied was blank, almost ghostly on the page. Next to it, a note in small handwriting: removed per administration. I felt bow rise in my throat. Someone in authority had actively erased her existence from the official records. Not by accident. Not oversight. Deliberate. My mind circled back to the essays. Hannah had written about fear, isolation, and the teasing on the bus. Now it all made sense. Her absence wasn't just in her life. It was being erased from the documentation that could have exposed what happened. I copied every document I could, photographing attendance sheets, field trip logs, and emails between staff. I needed evidence. Concrete proof that the school had attempted to cover the tragedy. Then I found an email trail from the day after the accident, sent from the principal's office to several staff members. Ensure no further questions regarding the field trip. All records of student absences and attendance must reflect the approved roster. No discrepancies. Do not discuss with parents or press. Understood. My hands shook. This wasn't negligence anymore. This was willful concealment. I backed away from the desk, my mind racing. The essays, the bus roster, Mr. Stanton's confession, Rick Doyle's account, all pointed to a coordinated effort to suppress the truth. And if the administration had gone this far, I realized I was stepping into dangerous territory. I packed up the papers and slipped out the side door, trying not to be noticed. Outside, the rain had returned in light spurts, cold drops soaking through my coat. The empty playground echoed with the distant laughter of children, unaware, innocent, carrying on while the past rotted beneath the surface. Driving home, I considered my next move. Public exposure was risky. Going to authorities could trigger more cover-up, but leaving it alone was impossible. Hannah's words demanded action. Her essays weren't just papers. They were voices, a record of what had happened, evidence that someone had ignored the cries of a girl who didn't survive. I reached my apartment and spread the papers across the kitchen table, reading them again. Every essay, every note, every correction told a story of oversight, fear, and indifference. And between the lines, a haunting pattern. Those who could have acted chose not to. And then I noticed something subtle. On one of the essays, the last one Hannah had written, there was a faint smudge of ink, almost like a fingerprint. Not her own, not in red pen like Mrs. Carver's corrections. Someone else had handled this paper after she died. I traced the smudge with my fingertip. The thought struck me cold. Someone had moved her work, kept it hidden, maybe even tried to manipulate it. And I realized, the truth I was chasing didn't just end with a student or a careless teacher. It extended to someone who had power, someone who had wanted Hannah gone from the record entirely. A soft tap at my window made me jump. The street outside was empty, but the shadows moved in the corners of my eyes. For the first time, I felt watched. Not a stranger, not a ghost, someone alive, alert, making sure I didn't dig too far. The message was clear. Stop now or face consequences. But I couldn't stop. Not when Hannah's story, and the truth behind her death, still hung between the lines, waiting for someone to connect the dots. The drive to Hannah's house felt heavier than ever. Each turn, each streetlight, cast shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should. The essays, the bus roster, the altered attendance records. All of it pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake. But talking to her mother felt necessary. She was the closest connection to Hannah's life before it had been erased. The house was small, a single-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn. Flowers dotted the front yard, muted in the drizzle that had returned. I rang the doorbell, and after a long pause, the door opened. A woman in her early 40s stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands gripping the doorframe. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice trembling. "I'm Claire Rowan," I said softly. "I was a substitute teacher at Meadowridge High. I knew Hannah, and I want to understand what happened that day." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Another teacher? Come inside." Inside, the house smelled faintly of vanilla and old books. The living room was filled with photographs of Hannah, smiling in school photos, laughing with friends, frozen in moments her mother clearly cherished. "I've been waiting for someone to ask questions," she said, settling into a chair. "Everyone acts like it's over. But it's not. Not for me." I nodded. "I understand. I've been looking through her essays, her notes. I want to know what she went through, what she felt." Tears welled in her eyes. She was scared, not just of the kids, but of being invisible. I asked the school for help after she told me about the teasing. They said it was normal, kids being kids. But it wasn't normal. And the teachers, they didn't stop it. I listened as she recounted Hannah's last days. The quiet sadness in her room, the notes left on her desk, the essays she tried to hand in but were never returned. Each detail was another piece of the puzzle. She believed no one was listening, her mother whispered. She thought if she disappeared, someone would finally care. I didn't realize she meant it. I felt the weight of her words. The essays, the roster, the bus ride. It wasn't just an accident. It was a story of negligence that extended beyond the bus, beyond the classroom. It reached the administration, the teachers, everyone who had looked the other way. I showed her the altered bus roster I had photographed. Her hands trembled as she held it. "They erased her," she whispered. "They tried to pretend she didn't exist." I nodded. "And I think someone is still trying to make sure no one finds out." Her eyes widened. "Do you mean someone in the school?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I've been followed. I've seen shadows. People who might not want the truth exposed." She placed a hand over mine, urgency in her touch. "You have to keep going. Don't let them scare you off. Hannah deserves that much." Her words struck a chord deep in me. This wasn't just about essays or bus rosters anymore. It was about a life erased, and a mother's grief compounded by the system that failed her child. We spent the afternoon going through Hannah's old belongings, notebooks, drawings, scraps of paper. Each piece carried traces of the girl who had existed fully, silently, and then vanished from everyone's attention. And as the sky darkened outside, casting long shadows across the living room, I realized that the story was far from over. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. The negligence on the bus, the altered records, the fearful whispers of the staff, it was all connected. And someone somewhere didn't want the connections made. When I left, the rain had thickened into a steady downpour. Hannah's mother stood at the door, waving, her eyes brimming with a mixture of hope and sorrow. Driving away, I knew I had to move quickly. Every step, every discovery, brought me closer to the truth, and potentially closer to danger. But if Hannah's story was ever going to be told, I had no choice but to keep going. The house disappeared behind me, the wet streets reflecting streetlights like fractured memories. And in that reflection, I saw not only the past but the urgency of uncovering what the school and its staff had tried so hard to hide. The clock was ticking. And with each passing moment, the shadows around Hannah's story grew longer, waiting for someone to finally shine a light. The next morning, I arrived at Meadowridge High with a sense of quiet determination. Every piece of Hannah's story, every altered document, every essay pointed to one conclusion. The system had failed her. And if I wanted the full picture, I had to speak to someone who had worked closely with the students, someone who could shed light on what was happening behind closed doors. That person was the school counselor, Ms. Lorraine Hayes. She had been at the school for over 20 years and, according to staff, knew every child by name. I found her in the counseling office, a small room filled with shelves of folders, motivational posters, and a faint scent of peppermint. She looked up from her desk as I entered, her expression cautious but curious. "Miss Hayes?" I asked softly. "I'm Claire Rowan, the substitute teacher." I wanted to ask you about Hannah Price and the other students on the field trip last May." Her eyes flickered, a shadow of recognition passing through them. "Hannah, poor girl. Yes, I remember her." I'm not sure how much I can say, but you can sit." I took the chair across from her. "I've read her essays. I've seen the bus roster and some of the records that were altered. I need to understand what was happening in the school, in the classroom, on the bus. Were there warning signs? Did anyone notice?" Lorraine sighed deeply, running her fingers through her hair. "Warning signs? Yes. So many. But people didn't listen. Teachers were busy, administrators didn't want to know, and the students themselves, they were afraid. Hannah, she was quieter than most. Observed too much, spoke too little. But she left clues in small ways. Essays, notes, behavior changes." "What kind of behavior changes?" I asked. "She became withdrawn," Lorraine said. "Avoided eye contact, stayed behind after class, asked to see me but only briefly. She was trying to communicate her fear without drawing attention. And the other students, they whispered, but no one wanted to tell the adults. They thought it would cause trouble." I nodded, absorbing her words. "And Ethan Crow?" Her lips pressed together. "He saw what was happening to Hannah. He tried to support her, to speak up. But the adults, they dismissed him. He was punished for telling the truth indirectly. By the time he died, he was exhausted emotionally, afraid, angry, hopeless." I felt the heaviness pressing down on me. 2 children crushed by neglect, and adults who turned away. Did anyone else notice? Teachers? Supervisors on the bus? I asked, my voice tight. Lorraine's gaze dropped. Some did. Some noticed subtle things, but they were afraid of repercussions, afraid of the administration, afraid of making waves. And after the accident, the instructions were clear. Nothing more to be said. Cover it up, move on. I felt my hands clench in my lap. The essays, the roster, the altered documents, it all pointed to the same thing, deliberate concealment. And now, for the first time, I understood how deep the fear went. "Why tell me this now?" I asked quietly. "Because you're the only one willing to look closer," she admitted. "The system failed Hannah and Ethan. And the students, even those still here, are scared. They don't speak. But if someone gathers the evidence, if someone tells the truth, maybe it matters. Maybe it can prevent it from happening again." Her words strengthened my resolve. I had to continue. I had to connect the essays, the bus roster, the testimonies, and the administration's cover-up into a coherent narrative. And I had to do it before anyone could interfere. Before I left, Lorraine handed me a small folder. "These are notes I took after the field trip. Observations, whispers, counseling logs. Not much, but they might help you." I took it carefully, thanking her. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and reflective. The school was quiet now, empty, but the weight of what had happened inside lingered like a fog. As I drove home, I began to lay out all the evidence on the passenger seat. Hannah's essays, the bus roster, altered attendance sheets, Mr. Stanton's notes, Rick Doyle's account, and Lorraine's folder. Each piece was a part of the same story, a story of negligence, fear, and deliberate erasure. And I realized, as the sun broke through the clouds in pale shafts of light, that uncovering this story wasn't just about truth. It was about justice, accountability, and ensuring that Hannah and Ethan's voices, silenced for far too long, were finally heard. But I also knew the risks. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered, the more likely it was someone would try to stop me. Someone had already followed me, watched me, warned me to quit. And now, armed with these documents, I was closer than ever to exposing the people who had tried to erase Hannah's existence. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still there, waiting to see if I would back down. I wouldn't. That evening, I sat at my small apartment desk, surrounded by the growing mountain of papers, essays, and folders. The rain pattered against the window, soft and steady, a background to the storm of thoughts in my head. Hannah's story, Ethan's death, Mr. Stanton's confession, Lorraine's notes, all pointed to one conclusion. The school had covered up what happened, but I needed proof. Concrete evidence beyond essays and recollections. Something official. Something that would show the deliberate orchestration to erase Hannah's presence and silence those who might speak. I turned my attention to the school's internal communications. Emails. Memos. Staff correspondence. I had access to a few forwarded messages from Mr. Stanton and Lorraine Hayes. One line in particular stood out. Ensure all records of absences and field trip rosters reflect approved names. No discrepancies. Do not discuss with parents or press. The tone was cold, authoritative, and unmistakably calculated. I began cross-referencing timestamps. Messages sent in the week following the field trip coincided with missing or altered attendance sheets. The pattern was clear. Someone at the administration level had orchestrated the concealment, ensuring no one could trace responsibility for Hannah's death. Then I found a chain of emails that made my stomach churn. They weren't just about records. They were about perception, control, and damage limitation. From principal's office to staff. Subject: field trip incident, confidential. Do not speak of the event. Any inquiries from parents or press are to be referred to me directly. Staff involved are instructed to adhere strictly to approved statements. Any deviation will result in disciplinary action. The words were deliberate, precise, and chilling in their implications. It wasn't negligence anymore. It was willful suppression. I traced the emails further, noting how copies were sent selectively. Mr. Stanton, Lorraine Hayes, and a few others. The exclusion of key personnel hinted at a knowledge hierarchy, a system designed to contain information and protect the institution's image over the students' well-being. The gravity of it hit me. The school hadn't just ignored warnings. They had created a wall of silence, fortified with threats, selective communication, and manipulation. Hannah's death and Ethan's suffering were the consequences of a carefully maintained facade. I pulled up the last email in the chain. It was the most damning. Sent the day after Hannah's death. Ensure all essays, notes, and student work from Field Trip 14 are stored in the principal's office. They are not to be seen by outside parties. Any documentation that could compromise the school's position must be flagged and kept confidential. I ran my hands through my hair. Every piece of evidence I'd collected so far, the roster, the essays, the notes, was corroborated by this chain. The administration had intentionally hidden the truth, suppressing any evidence that might implicate them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. The rain intensified outside. A soft roar against the window, echoing the tension building inside me. I realized that exposing this would not be easy. The people behind this were careful, experienced, and willing to protect themselves at any cost. My mind went back to the shadow I had seen in the hallway at school. Was it connected to this? Had someone been monitoring my progress, ensuring that I didn't dig too deep? Every warning, every subtle threat suddenly felt real and immediate. I made a decision. I would not back down. Hannah's essays, Ethan's story, Rick Doyle's account, Mr. Stanton's confessions, Lorraine's notes, and these emails formed a chain too strong to ignore. Someone had deliberately silenced the truth, and it was up to me to connect the dots. I copied the emails onto a secure drive, backing them up. I photographed each page carefully. The evidence had to be preserved, every word, every timestamp, every sender and recipient, in case anyone tried to destroy it. By the time I finally stood up and stretched, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The room smelled faintly of paper and ink, the faint scent mingling with the tension that refused to leave my chest. Somewhere, in the quiet darkness, I knew the people who had orchestrated this cover-up were still out there, watching, waiting, hoping no one would unravel the carefully constructed facade. And I realized, with a chill that ran down my spine, that uncovering the truth would make me a target. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when every piece of evidence screamed for justice. Hannah's voice, her essays, and the suppressed emails demanded it. And I was going to deliver. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. It was 3:47 a.m. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the world outside my apartment window still looked slick, black, and endless. The vibration didn't stop. It pulsed in steady intervals, insistent, like it wanted to be answered. I rubbed my eyes, picked it up, and saw a single text from an unknown number. "You're digging in the wrong places, Claire. Stop now. No signature. No punctuación." Just that message. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the glowing screen, half convinced it was a cruel prank. But the chill crawling up my spine told me it wasn't. No one outside the school knew what I was working on. I hadn't told a soul except the few people who had trusted me with fragments of the truth, which meant someone from the inside was watching. I deleted the text immediately, then took a deep breath, forcing my heartbeat to slow. Fear was natural, but it couldn't rule me. The next morning, I decided to return to the school. I needed to see the principal. The building felt different that day, quieter, heavier. The air itself seemed still. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights filling the hallways with a cold, sterile tone. As I walked toward the administrative wing, I could feel eyes on me. Not direct, but peripheral, glances from teachers, students, custodians who seemed to vanish the moment I looked their way. The principal's office was closed. A sign on the door read, "Out until further notice." I stood there for a long minute, staring at the small rectangular window in the door. The office beyond looked orderly, a desk, filing cabinets, a row of locked drawers. Too orderly. As I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. One of the side doors leading to the storage rooms was ajar. Barely. Just enough to see a sliver of shadow and a faint smell of disinfectant. Curiosity overcame caution. I pushed it open slowly. Inside was a dimly lit maintenance corridor lined with metal shelves. It led to a small back room that I'd never noticed before. A narrow space stacked with old binders, boxes, and an outdated computer humming softly on a desk. I stepped inside and immediately froze. On the computer screen was an open email draft. The subject line read, "Claire Rowan Report." My breath hitched. The body of the email contained only a few lines, typed but not sent. "She's looking into field trip 14 again. Has copies of the emails. Will move to publish soon. Watch her closely." The signature was what made my stomach twist. M. Stanton. Mr. Stanton. The same man who had tearfully confessed to his mistakes. The same one who claimed he was trying to make it right. For a second, the air seemed to drain from the room. The walls pressed in closer, the faint hum of the lights turning into a buzz in my ears. He'd warned me himself once, told me I was not safe if I kept asking questions. But now I realized the truth. He wasn't warning me out of care. He was part of it. Suddenly, footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. I quickly turned off the monitor and ducked behind one of the shelves. My pulse thudded in my ears. A man's voice, low and impatient, muttered from the hallway. "You left it open again." Then the sound of the door closing. The lock clicking. Silence. I waited, seconds, then minutes, until I was sure the footsteps had gone. Then I slipped out, my breath shallow, my body trembling. Outside, the cold November air hit me hard, and I realized my hands were shaking. The betrayal stung more than the fear. Stanton wasn't a remorseful whistleblower. He was still part of the cover-up, still trying to protect himself. That night, back at home, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. The emails, the photos, the text messages, and now, this discovery. I knew what this meant. I was being watched. Followed. The people who had covered up Hannah's death weren't just trying to bury the story anymore. They were actively preventing me from telling it. As the hours passed, I sat in the dim glow of my computer screen, rereading Hannah's essays. Her words felt prophetic now. Sometimes the ones who tell you to be quiet are the ones who need silence the most. By 2 a.m., I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow I would go public. I'd contact a journalist I trusted, someone outside the school district's influence. I'd share everything. But as I closed my laptop and stood up, I caught a flicker of light through the blinds. A car was parked across the street, engine idling, headlights off. It stayed there, not moving, just waiting. The car didn't leave. For almost an hour, it sat there across the street. a dark shape beneath the halo of a flickering lamppost. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, someone on a late call, a neighbor's visitor, but every time I glanced through the blinds, the same dull outline of a sedan waited there, engine faintly humming, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stillness of my apartment. It wasn't paranoia. I knew it now. I turned off the lights, moved quietly to the window, and lifted the blinds just enough to see. The driver's seat was shadowed, but every so often, a faint glow lit the inside, the blue flicker of a phone screen. Whoever it was, they were watching, waiting. The longer I stared, the more I realized this wasn't random surveillance. This was a warning. They wanted me to see them. I closed the blinds completely and stood there, listening to my own heartbeat. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, felt amplified, unnatural. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached the name Rick Doyle. He answered on the third ring. His voice was groggy. "Claire? It's late. What's going on?" "I think someone's outside," I whispered. "A car. They've been there for almost an hour." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "What kind of car?" "Doxiedan. No plates visible." Rick cursed under his breath. "Don't open the door. Don't look again. If they wanted to do something now, they'd have done it already. They're watching, not acting, which means they're scared. You've got something they don't want getting out." His words did little to calm me. What do I do? "Tomorrow morning, meet me at the diner on 7th and Willow. 8 o'clock. Bring everything. We'll figure out how to protect it." "Rick, promise me you won't leave your apartment tonight," he said firmly. "Promise me." I nodded even though he couldn't see. "I promise." After we hung up, I checked the blinds again. The car was still there. I decided to stay on the couch, the laptop open beside me. Every few minutes, I'd glance toward the window, but the car never moved. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion won. I must have drifted into a half-sleep because I woke suddenly to the sound of movement, the crunch of gravel just outside my window. My heart leapt. I froze listening. A shadow moved past the edge of the curtain. Then a faint tap against the glass. I didn't breathe. Another tap. Slow. Deliberate. My body went cold. Then just as suddenly it stopped. I waited for what felt like forever, staring at the curtains, unable to move. When I finally dared to look, the street outside was empty. The car was gone. But taped to the outside of my window, fluttering slightly in the early dawn breeze, was a piece of paper. I hesitated before peeling it off the glass. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Only 3 words were written there, in blocky black letters. "You were warned." That morning, I arrived at the diner on 7th and Willow before sunrise. It was one of those quiet places that smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs. Rick was already there, sitting in a corner booth, eyes bloodshot but alert. I slid the folder across the table. Emails, essays, photos, everything. He flipped through it quickly, his jaw tightening. "You weren't kidding. This is damning. Enough to get people fired. Maybe prosecuted." "But they already know I have it," I said, pulling the note from my pocket and laying it on the table. "They came to my window last night." Rick's expression darkened. He picked up the note with 2 fingers. "They're getting desperate." "That's good. Means we're close to something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small USB drive. "Make a copy of everything and put it on this. I'll handle getting it to someone outside the district, someone who can publish it safely." As I inserted the drive into my laptop, my reflection flickered on the diner window. For a brief moment, I saw movement, a man standing across the street, facing the diner. Then he turned and walked away into the fog. I tried to brush it off, but something in Rick's eyes told me he'd seen it too. "They're still watching," I whispered. He nodded slowly. Then we moved faster. When I left the diner, the morning was quiet again. Normal people heading to work. Children waiting for buses. Life moving on, as if nothing was happening. But beneath the calm, I could feel it, a thread of tension pulling tighter. Whoever they were losing control. And when people like that start to lose control, they become dangerous. That night, I checked my window again. No car this time. Just silence. But the note still lay on my desk, edges curling slightly. Those 3 words burned into my mind. You were warned. By the time the weekend came, I'd barely slept. Every creak in my apartment made me flinch. Every car that slowed outside sent my pulse racing. The note still sat on my desk, folded neatly beside the laptop, like a taunt. But what frightened me most wasn't the threat itself. It was the silence that followed. Whoever had been watching me wasn't trying to scare me anymore. They were waiting. I decided to focus on the evidence. If I stayed busy, I wouldn't fall apart. I started copying files onto Rick's USB drive. The essays, the emails, the photos I'd taken of the altered rosters. I'd been working for almost 2 hours when I realized the progress bar on my screen had frozen. The drive had disconnected. I reached down to check the port, and froze. The USB was gone. My heart stopped. I searched the desk, the floor, the drawers. Nothing. I even checked the carpet, every cable, every corner. Gone. I sat there for a full minute, trying to convince myself I'd misplaced it. But deep down I knew I hadn't. It had been plugged in moments ago. I hadn't left the apartment since returning from the diner, which meant someone had come in. My hands shook as I checked the locks. Both were still latched. Windows sealed. No signs of forced entry. I checked the hallway. Empty. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution, the kind used by the building's janitor. I went back inside and locked the door again, my breath quick and shallow. Then I saw it. A small smudge on the inside of my window pane. Not from my hand. A partial print. They'd been inside. I called Rick immediately. He didn't pick up. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. Rick, it's Claire. The USB is gone. Someone's been inside. Call me back, please. I hung up and sat in silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, sharper, like a countdown. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick taps. Then one long. My first instinct was panic. Then I heard a voice, low, tense. Claire, it's me. Rick. I opened the door cautiously. He stepped inside quickly, shutting it behind him. His hair was disheveled, eyes bloodshot. You okay? He asked immediately. No. The USB's gone. Someone came in while I was asleep or out. He ran a hand through his hair. Damn it. I had a bad feeling this would happen. Did you bring your copy? I asked. He hesitated. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Rick, I said slowly. Do you still have it? His jaw tightened. No. My apartment was broken into last night. Files gone, computer wiped. Whoever we're dealing with, they're professionals. The weight of his words settled heavily between us. I moved to the window and looked out. The street was quiet. Normal. But it all felt staged now, too ordinary, too calm. What do we do? I whispered. Rick exhaled, his voice barely above a murmur. We go higher. The local press won't touch it. They're scared of the district. But there's an investigative reporter in Chicago who's worked on corruption cases before. I'll get in touch with her. He checked his phone, typing quickly. In the meantime, you need to get out of this apartment. Tonight. I frowned. Where? Anywhere. A motel, a friend's house. Somewhere they won't expect. As he spoke, I noticed something strange. The faint outline of dust on the floor near my door. A thin line where the rug had been moved slightly. Someone had stepped inside. Recently. Rick, I whispered, look at the floor. He followed my gaze, and his face paled. We both froze. The apartment was silent, but the kind of silence that listens back. He mouthed, don't move. Then he walked quietly toward the bedroom, hand slipping into his jacket pocket. I didn't see a weapon, but the motion was instinctive, protective. He opened the bedroom door slowly. The light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating the bed, the nightstand, and the window. It was open. Just a crack. The curtain fluttered gently. Rick shut it quickly and turned to me. They're watching you closer than we thought. Pack what you can. We're leaving now. I grabbed my bag, laptop, and the original folder of papers. Rick stayed by the door, glancing out the peephole. As we stepped into the hallway, he said, don't look back. We walked fast, down the stairwell, out into the gray afternoon. The air smelled of rain and exhaust. My mind was spinning, my chest tight. Rick led me to his car, Not the same one I'd seen across the street, thank God. He unlocked it, started the engine, and we drove off without speaking. For a while, the only sound was the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Then Rick said, almost to himself, "They're trying to erase everything, not just the files, but the people connected to them." I looked at him, my throat dry. People. He nodded grimly. "You're not the first to dig into this, Claire. Just the last one left." Outside, the rain began again, soft, relentless. And as the city lights blurred through the water on the windshield, I realized how deep this went. The cover-up wasn't about one tragedy. It was about a pattern. A system built on silence, where anyone who spoke up disappeared. And I had just become their next problem. Rick drove us far enough out of the city that the streets thinned, the buildings disappeared, and the occasional flickering streetlight marked our path. I gripped the edge of the seat, my knuckles white, watching the dark shapes of trees and telephone poles blur past. Every shadow felt alive, every sound of the tires on wet asphalt made me jump. "Are we safe?" I asked, my voice small in the car. Rick didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight. "Safe isn't the word I'd use," he said finally. "Hidden. For a few hours at least." Rick didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight. "Safe isn't the word I'd use," he said finally. "Hidden. For a few hours at least." We pulled into a small roadside motel, one of those aging places with neon signs that buzzed faintly in the evening drizzle, the kind where the carpet smells faintly of cleaning chemicals and cigarette smoke, the kind of place that blends into the night, so no one remembers it exists. The clerk looked us over but didn't ask questions. The kind of apathetic welcome only happens when the world is indifferent. Rick paid in cash, handed me the key, and led me to the room. It was small. A bed, a nightstand, a tiny bathroom with cracked tiles. The kind of place that doesn't promise comfort, only shelter. I set my bag down carefully and looked around. "Did you see anyone follow us?" I asked. Rick shook his head. "Not this far. But they know where you are. That's why we move fast tomorrow." I nodded, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. I set my laptop and folder of papers on the desk, but my gaze kept returning to my bag. Something felt off. I opened it slowly. Half of my belongings had been moved, neatly, deliberately. My laptop was untouched, thankfully, but my wallet and phone case were slightly shifted. And then I noticed it. A small, folded piece of paper tucked into the lining of my bag that I didn't put there. I unfolded it carefully. It was a single line, scrawled in black ink. "Every move is watched. Don't think you're alone." My stomach turned. Rick saw it immediately. "They've been here," he said flatly. "They tracked you. They even know what you brought with you." I swallowed hard. "But how? This motel? They can't know." "They know everything," he said. "Every trip you made, every place you stopped. We're not just dealing with a school cover-up anymore. This is bigger. Much bigger." The room fell silent. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. I felt the walls pressing closer. The rain outside began again, tapping the windows in a steady, relentless rhythm. Rick pulled a chair close to mine. "We have to be careful tonight. Don't use your phone except for emergencies. Don't go near the windows. They've been watching long enough to know patterns. They know when you sleep. They know when you leave. They know what you carry." I nodded. My mind raced, trying to process the reality. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone was still following. And I had just become the target of a surveillance campaign I didn't fully understand. I tried to distract myself. I pulled out Hannah's essays, the altered rosters, and the emails we'd collected. I laid them on the desk and went through each page, each line, each timestamp. Reading them now, in the quiet, dimly lit room, gave them a weight they hadn't carried before. Every erased name, every altered record, every carefully worded internal memo was no longer just negligence. It was a deliberate attempt to silence the truth. Rick stood by the window, glancing out periodically, tension in his shoulders. "We're not safe here for long," he said. "They'll find us if we linger too long. But you need rest. You're running on empty, Claire. Tomorrow is going to be worse." I leaned back on the bed, exhaustion finally crashing into me. My eyes traced the edges of the room. the hum of the fluorescent light, the steady pulse of rain on the roof, and I realized how vulnerable we were. We weren't just uncovering a story anymore. We were being hunted. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me. Every sound, the faint hum of the heater, the creak of the bed, the distant rustle of tires on wet roads outside, made me jolt awake. Every shadow seemed like a figure watching, waiting. At some point, I drifted into a half-sleep, but even then, dreams of shadowy figures, open doors, and whispers in the hallways haunted me. I woke to a sudden noise, a soft knock at the door. My heart jumped. Rick was immediately at the door, listening. A voice, low and deliberate, said, "You can't hide forever." The words echoed in the room, chilling and intimate. Someone knew we were here. Someone had found us despite all precautions. I swallowed hard. They're not going to stop. Rick's jaw tightened. No. And neither can we. We keep going. One way or another, the world has to know what happened to Hannah, and Ethan, and every student they silenced. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the roof. Inside, the fluorescent light hummed above us. And I realized that tonight, in this small roadside motel, we weren't safe. But the story, the truth, was closer than ever. And for the first time, I understood the price of uncovering it. The morning light filtered weakly through the motel's thin curtains, casting a pale, gray glow across the room. The rain had eased to a drizzle, leaving the streets outside slick and reflective. I sat at the small table, Hannah's essays and the emails spread before me, while Rick spoke quietly into his phone. "I've got her on the line," he said, finally hanging up. "She's willing to meet. Says she'll travel, but only if we're careful." "Who?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Clara Jennings," he replied. "Investigative reporter from Chicago. She's exposed school corruption before. She has a reputation for digging into cases no one else dares touch." I felt a surge of hope. Someone beyond the district, beyond the people trying to silence me, might finally hear the story. But that hope was tempered by unease. Whoever had tracked us to this motel was still out there. How safe was it to bring another person into this web? By mid-afternoon, Clara arrived. Rick met her at the parking lot and guided her into the motel room. She was taller than I expected, with a steady gaze that made it feel like she could see right through the tension in the room. Her coat dripped from the drizzle outside, and she carried a small satchel filled with notebooks and a tablet. "Claire Rowan?" she asked, extending her hand. Her voice was calm, deliberate, professional. I shook it, noting the firmness of her grip. "Yes, and this is Rick Doyle. We've gathered information on a case involving Meadow Ridge High and a student named Hannah Price." Clara's eyes flicked to the documents on the table. "I've read the briefing Rick sent, but I need more. I need the evidence firsthand." I began laying out the materials. Hannah's essays, the altered attendance sheets, the internal emails from the administration, Mr. Stanton's confessions, Lorraine Hayes' notes. Each page carried weight. Each line of text a story of negligence, fear, and cover-up. Clara picked up the USB Rick had recovered, examining it carefully. "These files, you're sure they're intact? Not tampered with?" I nodded. "We verified everything, but someone has been tracking us. They broke into my apartment, took a USB, and left a warning. We don't know how they know our locations." Her brow furrowed. "Then time is critical. Once we move this out, it needs to be published immediately. Otherwise, they'll try to destroy it again." Rick leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "We can't stay here tonight. It's only a matter of time before they find out we've involved her." Clara studied me. "You trust me?" I hesitated. In the world we were dealing with, trust was a luxury. But her steady presence, the professional calm in her demeanor, felt real. I nodded. "Good," she said. "Then we have a plan. First, we create multiple copies of the evidence. One stays with me, one with Rick, one with you. Then we move out tonight. I have a safe location where we can analyze everything, away from prying eyes." As she spoke, a flicker in the motel window caught my eye. I stiffened. Rick noticed. "What is it?" "I think someone's outside." Clara didn't flinch. She reached into her coat, pulling out a small camera, and held it toward the window. "Let's document them. We'll need proof they're tracking you." We waited, tense, ears straining over the soft patter of rain. The shadow moved again, a figure pacing slowly across the parking lot, stopping, looking toward the room. The camera clicked quietly. "They're professional," Clara said, "but sloppy enough that we can track patterns." Good. I felt a flicker of relief. For the first time, I wasn't completely alone. But the presence of that shadow reminded me. Getting this story out wasn't just about exposing negligence anymore. Whoever had orchestrated this cover-up had power, reach, and intent. They weren't just hiding the truth. They were willing to follow, intimidate, and silence anyone who threatened their control. Clara packed the camera away and turned to me. "Tonight we move. We stay ahead. You've done the hard work. Now it's my turn to make sure the world sees it." I took a deep breath. My hands shook slightly, but I felt a resolve hardening inside me. This wasn't just about Hannah and Ethan anymore. It was about every student silenced, every adult who turned away, every truth someone wanted buried. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof. But inside that motel room, a small circle of determination had formed. And as the day faded into night, I realized the real fight was just beginning. We left the motel just after midnight. The rain had eased to a mist, thin and whispering across the windshield as Rick drove. The highway stretched ahead, empty and silver under the weak glow of the streetlights. Clara sat in the back seat beside me, her satchel clutched tight against her. Inside were the copies of every document, file, and photograph we'd gathered. I could feel the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the moral one. The truth, heavy and dangerous, sat between us. No one spoke for the first 30 minutes. The silence was a fragile thing, broken only by the rhythmic wipers and the hum of the tires on wet asphalt. Finally, Clara said, "We'll head east. There's a farmhouse outside of Riverton. The owners are gone for the season. I've used it before when stories went bad. No cameras, no neighbors." Rick nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "What about your editor? Anyone know where you're headed?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "No. That's the point. We passed a gas station." I glanced at the reflection in the side mirror and froze. A pair of headlights had appeared behind us. At first, I tried to brush it off. Highways always had late-night travelers. But the car stayed behind us, steady and uncomfortably close. When Rick switched lanes, the headlights followed. "Rick?" I said quietly. He glanced at the mirror. "I see it." For a moment, no one breathed. Clara leaned forward slightly, peering between the seats. "Stay calm. Just drive normally." But the car behind us didn't back off. When Rick slowed to let it pass, it slowed too. The pattern was unmistakable. "They found us," I whispered. Rick's jaw clenched. "Not yet, they haven't." He took the next exit sharply, tires screeching against the wet pavement. The headlights followed. The road narrowed, winding through a stretch of woods. Rick cut the headlights for a few seconds, turning down a side road. We coasted in darkness, the sound of our breath loud in the enclosed space. The following car slowed, then passed the turnoff. Its lights disappeared. We waited. The quiet returned, thick and oppressive. Finally, Rick exhaled. "We're clear. For now." My hands trembled in my lap. I looked at Clara, who sat perfectly still, her gaze sharp, analytical. "They're not going to stop," I said softly. "They'll follow us wherever we go." "They will," she said. "But now we know their range. They're tracking movement, not signal. Which means they've got someone feeding them updates." "You mean?" "Someone inside the school. Or the district. Maybe even local law enforcement." Rick shook his head. "That narrows it to half the town." The rain thickened again, smearing the windshield. Rick drove in silence for another hour, every turn measured, every passing car a potential threat. When we finally reached the farmhouse, the sky was beginning to pale, that ghostly gray before dawn. It sat at the end of a gravel drive, surrounded by bare trees and open fields. No lights, no sound, just the steady hum of insects and rain. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. The furniture was draped in sheets, the kind of stillness that made every footstep echo. Clara wasted no time. She set up her laptop on the dining table, laid out the drives, and connected them. "This place has no signal," she said. That's good. But once we move this evidence online, we'll have a window of exposure. We need to be ready for blowback. Rick began checking doors and windows. I'll secure the perimeter. I watched the files open on Clara's laptop. Folders full of reports, photographs, meeting minutes, and personal memos. Each one a piece of the puzzle. Each one connecting names, dates, and signatures. It wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate concealment. A network of people, high up in the district, ensuring certain events never reached the public. Hannah Price wasn't an accident. Ethan's death wasn't coincidence. They were casualties of a system that buried its mistakes under polite bureaucracy. And somewhere in that system, someone had decided that I, the substitute, had seen too much. As Clara worked, a soft noise cut through the quiet. From outside, a car door. Rick moved instantly, gun drawn from his jacket. A small, discreet one, the kind detectives keep hidden. Clara shut her laptop, eyes wide. We held still, listening. Footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate. My heart pounded in my ears. Rick motioned for silence, moved toward the window, and peeked through the curtain. His face tightened. "Two of them," he whispered. "They're wearing dark coats. No headlights on the car." "Police?" I asked. He shook his head. "No uniforms." I felt the walls close in again. There was nowhere left to run. Clara reached for her phone, typing quickly. "If we don't make it out, this backup sends the files to 3 editors in the morning." Rick glanced at me. "Claire, stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't let them take that drive." Outside, one of the men knocked on the door. Soft. Polite. Then again harder. "Claire Rowan," a voice called. "We just want to talk." Rick's hand tightened around the gun. "No," he whispered. "They don't want to talk." The second knock came louder, shaking the old wood. Then a voice, calm and oddly familiar, spoke through the door. "Claire, it's Principal Matthews. You've made a serious mistake." My blood ran cold. He had found us. And he hadn't come alone. The knocking stopped for a moment, replaced by silence so thick it pressed into my ears. My pulse thundered in my chest. Rick stayed close, his hand gripping the gun so tightly that his knuckles were white. Clara crouched beside me, her laptop closed, her gaze sharp and alert. Then came the voice again, calm, deliberate, familiar. "Claire, it's Principal Matthews. You've made a serious mistake." I swallowed hard. Matthews, the man who had always smiled behind his polished veneer, who'd reassured parents and teachers alike, now sounded like a predator sizing up its prey. Rick whispered, "Don't open it." "Mr. Matthews," I said cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" "To talk. To make sure you understand what you've done." I glanced at Clara. She shook her head subtly. "They'll try to bluff," she said. "Don't react until we know what's real." The knock came again, this time sharper, more insistent. Rick's hand tightened around the gun. The doorknob rattled slightly. "I don't think he's bluffing," he muttered. I thought of Hannah, of Ethan, of all the students who had been ignored, silenced, and erased. My hands tightened around the folder of papers. Rick whispered, "We have to stay calm. Open the door, but slowly. No sudden moves." I stepped toward the door, the rain-slick floor cool beneath my bare feet. The second knock came, heavy and forceful, shaking the doorframe. I opened the door just enough to speak, keeping my body mostly behind the frame. Matthews stood there, drenched from the drizzle outside. His suit was dark and wet, hair slicked back, eyes sharp. But there was something else, a subtle tremor in his jaw, a twitch in his fingers. Fear, or maybe anger barely restrained. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't about Hannah, not just her. You've exposed a network that goes beyond this school. District administrators, officials, people who thought they were untouchable. And now you've drawn attention." I held the folder tighter. Hannah's death wasn't an accident. Ethan's death wasn't an accident. You and your staff tried to cover it up. His face flickered. For a moment I thought I saw guilt. Then it hardened. "You think you're so clever. But people like me don't act alone. You've just put yourself in the crosshairs." Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "We're not leaving until the evidence is safe. And no one, not you, not anyone, will stop it from coming out. Matthews's gaze shifted from me to Clara, and then to Rick, who stood protectively in front of me. He weighed his options carefully, like a chess player calculating multiple moves ahead. Finally, he said, "You don't know what you've started. You think getting this out is justice. But exposing the system, it will destroy more than you can imagine." I swallowed. I'd rather destroy it than let it continue. I'm not afraid of consequences. Hannah isn't here to tell her story. I will. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes, and then, with a slight smirk, he said, "You should be." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then abruptly turned and walked back to his car parked outside. I caught a glimpse of a dark sedan parked across the gravel lot, similar to the ones that had been following us on the highway. Rick exhaled slowly. "They're not alone," he muttered. "Matthews has backup. Someone's always watching." Clara nodded, quickly reopening the laptop. "We don't have much time. We need to create the online drop now, while they're distracted." I watched her fingers move quickly, uploading files to multiple secure servers, sending encrypted copies to journalists who had agreed to hold them until publication. The hum of the laptop was the only sound for several minutes. Outside, the wind picked up. Rain splashed against the roof, like distant applause for the danger we were inviting into our lives. Finally, Clara leaned back and exhaled. "Done. The evidence is safe. Copies are in multiple locations. Even if something happens here tonight, the story goes live in the morning." Rick lowered the gun slightly, still alert but relieved. "Good. Now we need to stay put and watch for anyone approaching. It's not over, but at least we've made it harder for them to erase everything." I sank into a chair, exhausted but resolute. For the first time in weeks, I felt a fragile sense of security. We'd done the hard part, securing the truth. And yet, the chill in my veins reminded me that the threat wasn't gone. Matthews had left with a warning, and the people behind him were patient. They would wait. They would follow. They would strike if given the chance. But tonight, in this isolated farmhouse, we had the upper hand. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, defiant thought. No matter what they tried, the story would be told. The station lights flickered faintly as dawn broke outside, soft gray spilling through the blinds. Claire sat across from Detective Waller in the small interview room. Her hair was tangled, eyes rimmed with red. On the table sat a styrofoam cup of untouched coffee, gone cold hours ago. Waller hadn't spoken for several minutes. He just looked at her, elbows resting on the metal desk, tapping a pen slowly. The air felt thick with the weight of everything that had happened. The chase, the gunshot, the boy's body by the road. Claire's voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. "He wasn't supposed to die." Waller nodded, his tone calm, almost too calm. "Then tell me how it started." She looked down at her trembling hands. "It started before I even met him. Before that day I substituted. It started when I ignored every sign that something was off about that town." Waller leaned forward. "Go on." "I thought I was there to teach, to fill in for a day. But when that boy came to me, when he told me his brother had done something terrible, I didn't know what to do. He was scared, really scared. I could see it in his eyes." She paused, blinking hard. "I thought if I told someone, it'd help. But it made things worse." Waller set down his pen. "The principal?" "Yes. He told me to leave it alone. Said the family was troubled. He didn't want any noise. But that boy kept showing up, after school, outside the gate. He said he couldn't go home. He said his brother killed someone in the woods." The detective's jaw tightened. "And that's when you decided to go with him?" Claire nodded slowly. "He begged me to come. I didn't believe him, not really. But when we went there, when we found what was buried..." Her voice cracked. "It was real. There was a woman. Just bones mostly. And he said his brother made him help." The pen tapping stopped. Silence spread again, heavy and suffocating. "And then, I told the sheriff," she said. "But the next day he was gone. That's when the phone calls started. Notes on my windshield. The people in town stopped talking to me." Her breath caught. "Then someone tried to break into my house. That's when Rick came." Waller's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Rick Parker." Claire nodded. He was helping me. He said he could protect me. But last night, she couldn't finish. Her throat burned. Waller turned off the recorder. Claire, Rick Parker isn't who you think he is. Her head snapped up. What? He's not a private investigator. He's ex-cop. Was fired 6 years ago for planting evidence. He's been freelancing ever since, digging into small-town cases for payoffs. Claire stared at him, stunned. No. That's not possible. He saved me. Maybe he thought he could. Maybe he used you to get to the truth, Waller said, leaning back in his chair. He called me last night. Told me everything. Said he'd hand over the evidence at sunrise. Then the line went dead. Claire's chest tightened. You mean he's missing? Waller said quietly. We found his truck near the old bridge. Blood on the steering wheel. Her stomach dropped. No. The detective's expression softened. We'll find him. But I need you to finish this. I need to know who was behind it all. Claire hesitated, then exhaled a shaky breath. The principal, she said. It's him. The boy said his brother took orders from him. They used the woods. They used the old hunting cabin. Why? Her eyes flicked toward the one-way mirror. Because the women he buried, they weren't strangers. They were mothers. Girls from the school. The ones who reported abuse. Waller's face went pale. Jesus. Claire's voice lowered to a whisper. They made it all disappear. They made the records vanish. The police reports, everything. That boy, he was just a kid caught in it. The door opened behind them. An officer stepped in, eyes wide. Sir, you need to see this. Waller stood, motioning for Claire to stay seated. But as he stepped into the hall, Claire caught a glimpse of the officer's clipboard. A photo clipped to it. Her breath froze. Rick. Eyes open, face pale, lying half submerged in water by the bridge. Her cup fell, coffee splattering across the floor. She felt her pulse hammer in her ears as she stood. Detective, she called weakly. No response. The hallway outside buzzed with voices, radios crackling, hurried footsteps. Claire pressed her palms to the table to steady herself. Through the thin walls, she could hear them, the muted, overlapping words. Bridge found bag of photos. Then something else. A voice. Not Waller's. Someone closer. Just outside the door. Tell her I'll see her soon. It was low, familiar, and filled with a quiet, chilling certainty. She turned toward the sound, but the door was already closing. The light above flickered once. Then again. Claire sat back down slowly, eyes fixed on the door, unable to breathe. Somewhere down the hall, a phone began to ring. And it didn't stop. The phone on the table rang insistently, echoing through the small, sterile interview room. Claire's fingers hovered above it, frozen. Her chest was tight, heart hammering, mind racing. Rick's fate, the boy, the principal, the cover-up. It all seemed to collapse at once into that small, buzzing device. Detective Waller finally stepped forward, picking up the receiver. Hello. His voice was calm, measured, but tension lurked beneath. On the other end, a voice she recognized immediately, low, deliberate, almost intimate. Claire Rowan. We need to finish this. Meet me where it all began. The line went dead. Claire sank into her chair, trembling. He's alive, she whispered. Waller shook his head. We don't know. But that voice, it's Matthews. The room seemed suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. The flood of the past 24 hours. The threats, the chases, the evidence, the deaths, pressed down on her. But beneath it, a burning resolve remained. She couldn't back down now. She followed Waller out of the interview room and into the car. The sun was rising, a pale orange light reflecting on the rain-slick streets. He drove in silence for a long stretch, the world around them quiet, the city slowly waking. Finally, he pulled into a lot near the outskirts, an old abandoned schoolyard. The building loomed ahead, dark and broken, echoing the past horrors it had sheltered. Matthews had chosen it carefully, a place tied to every secret, every disappearance, every cover-up Claire had uncovered. Waller gestured toward the entrance. Inside. Be ready for anything. He knows how far we'll go. Claire's hands tightened around the folder of papers she had kept close since the motel. Each page carried the weight of every life affected. every lie uncovered. She swallowed hard, then followed Waller up the cracked steps. Inside, the smell hit her immediately: dust, mildew, and something metallic, blood, old and stale. The hallways were narrow, lit by a few broken overhead lights, their hum echoing softly. Every step she took seemed louder than it should, each echo a warning. Then she heard him. "Matthews!" "Come." "Commanding." "Claire!" He called from the far end of the hallway, voice carrying. "You shouldn't have come alone. Or with friends." She froze. The folder trembled in her hands. But she forced herself to move, each step steady despite the fear pooling in her stomach. Rick. The boy. Everyone she cared about? Their fate was unknown. Matthews emerged from the shadows, flanked by two figures she couldn't identify. His face was calm, almost smiling, but there was steel beneath it. He extended a hand toward her. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into," he said. "This was never about a single student. It's about control, about keeping the town safe from chaos. People like you think they're heroes, but heroes die." Claire's voice was steady, stronger than she felt. "No. This is about justice. Hannah. Ethan. Every life you tried to erase. It ends tonight." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You still don't see the bigger picture." Before she could react, Waller stepped forward. "Enough, Matthews. It's over. The evidence is already public. People know. You can't hide behind this anymore." Matthews's expression faltered. For the first time, she saw a flicker of fear, brief, sharp, human. "You think they'll believe you?" he spat, gesturing toward the papers in her hands. Clara's voice joined, calm but firm. "They don't have to believe. We have proof. We have records, emails, eyewitness testimony. You're finished." For a moment, silence filled the hallway. Matthews's eyes darted around, calculating, weighing options. Then, with a sudden movement, he lunged, not at Claire, but at the door, smashing through a window and running into the shadows outside. The two figures with him hesitated, then fled as sirens wailed in the distance. Claire sank against the wall, trembling. Waller and Clara were beside her in an instant. Rick's truck was found a mile away, abandoned but empty. A note had been left on the windshield. "You got lucky. Next time, we won't wait for mistakes." The words burned, but Claire pressed the folder to her chest. She'd survived. The story was safe. And somewhere out there, justice was moving forward, even if the threat remained. Later, as the morning light filled the old schoolyard, she sat quietly, listening to the distant sounds of a city awakening. Rain dripped from the broken roof, and the smell of wet earth lingered. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe fully. She had been terrified, hunted, pushed to the edge of reason. But the story, the truth, was no longer in shadows. Some doors had closed. Some would never open again. But in that moment, the night felt less heavy, and the morning, for the first time, felt like a beginning. Outside, sirens faded into the distance. Inside, Claire held the folder tight, whispering softly, "This is for them. For Hannah. For Ethan. For all of them." The rain stopped. The sun broke through the clouds. And the story, long hidden in silence, finally had a voice.